I am 19 and I've already started working on my death plan. It's not set in stone, the plan part of it. The death part is pretty inevitable, but you can never be too prepared for when it comes to what you want done with your remains after you pass away. For me, when I pass on, I want my loved ones to put me to rest in a way that respects me but also benefits the earth. The way Westerners have traditionally disposed of our dead poses a threat to the environment, and there are greener methods available. Some may find it peculiar to think about death preparations at this point in their life, but it is vital to at least consider the impacts that we leave behind even when we're no longer alive to see their effects. I feel qualified to share these ideas with you today because aside from being a death enthusiast and a death positivity advocate, I've also taken a course on death and dying in the Western world last year. And so today I'll be telling you why the traditional ways we've been putting our dead to rest are not sustainable or good for the earth, and I'll also be going over a number of alternative burial methods that you may or may not know of. I'll start off by explaining the environmental costs of traditional burial and cremation. The way we Westerners have traditionally been putting our dead to rest consumes a lot of time and resources and can be harmful for a number of ecological reasons. Firstly, traditional burial requires a lot of space and a lot of time. And, the problem with overcrowding in burial grounds has been prevalent for some time. An example of this would be in Great Britain in the year 1885, where according to Richard Yarwood in the Geography of Green Burial in Britain, society discovered a decreasing supply of burial space, generating the advent of public cemeteries and graveyards, because graveyards were becoming full. Space is just one facet of unsustainability that we see in Western death rituals. The body itself poses many issues when we think about what gets buried with it. According to the environmental impact of death, over 800,000 gallons of formaldehyde-based embalming fluids are buried in U.S. cemeteries every year. The problem, as they state, is that formaldehyde, according to the EPA, is a carcinogen. And so, secondhand exposure to this over time, from body to soil to living human being, can cause adverse health effects. Formaldehyde is used for showing bodies in a wake or a funeral, and it also slows down decay. But without embalming fluid, a body that has not been embalmed still takes a while to decay. According to Nick Cruz in the Environmental Impacts Caused by Cemeteries, putrefaction, or decay, of an unembalmed corpse depends greatly on the exposure of the corpse to and temperature, the soil, and the landscape, and the decomposition process alone can take months or even years. Of course, the body and the embalming fluid are not the only things being introduced into the ground. Cruz also brings up that contaminants are absorbed by the surrounding soil and plants, from the varnish used on the casket to the copper handles that also can release chromium, lead, nickel, and zinc into the soil. Cremation is another common option that provides some environmental pros but also some cons. Cruz states that cremation essentially is a sped up version of a traditional burial, breaking down the body in hours instead of 20 to 30 years. So the problem of not having enough space is solved with cremation. However, we still butt heads with the issue of pollution. According to the environmental impact of death, while cremation may not be as damaging as full service burial, it requires the burning of natural gas and the release of greenhouse gases. One cremation takes about 28 gallons worth of fuel to employ, and it releases about 504 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere. If you multiply that by the 1 million bodies cremated annually in the US, that's 270,000 tons of CO2 released into the atmosphere. You may not think that, this also vaporizes other things within the body, such as the formaldehyde, as well as mercury that can be found in amalgam dental fillings. Now, you may not think that a cavity or two per person could do much damage in the grand scope of cremations, but according to Richard Yarwood, in Great Britain, 16% of the mercury that goes into the atmosphere comes from cremations. We also can't forget the sheer volume of energy required to run a crematorium. It requires a lot. In a publication by Katie Herzog, she explains that each cremation, any person's death arrangements can be modified so that the person can be put to rest and ecological harm can be reduced. If you're more interested in a proxy to cremation, there's another option that achieves almost the same results with less pollution. Alkaline hydrolysis is a process similar to cremation. Crews state that in alkaline hydrolysis, the body is placed in a chamber at 180 degrees, while steam containing potassium hydroxide circulates inside. This process breaks down all the tissues, and biohazards are safely disposed of in a drainage system, leaving just the bones, which can be turned into ashes and returned to the family. If traditional burial is more common in your family, those can also be modified to be greener. According to burialplanning.com, a natural burial does not use embalming fluid, a casket, or a burial vault, and the remains are usually just placed in the earth, sometimes sporting a shroud or a biodegradable casket. Some people really like the addition of nature in their burial rituals and grow plants on top of their burial site. According to Qin Zheng in his article on Chinese environmental ethics, tree burial eliminates the need for standard burial vaults and encourages people to adopt land and plant a tree on their site. Zheng also proposes flower burial, which involves a small plot about the size of a typical grave. There, a specially treated biodegradable urn would be buried, and a flower bed would be placed on top of that. These are just a few unique ways people are transforming the future deathscape for generations to come. To put it simply, what I hope to achieve today was a heightened understanding of the impacts that even in death we can leave behind. To reemphasize, traditional burial, as we know it, is not sustainable or good for the earth, and there are a number of alternative types of burials that are available, more effective in decomposition, and return your bodily materials back to nature. I never told you my death plan, but I think I have it more or less settled on a natural burial. That's just what I would want. And I attribute my consideration of this method in part to a quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who stated that, in death, I would request to be buried, not cremated, so that the energy content contained within my body gets returned back to the earth, so that flora and fauna may dine upon it as I have dined upon flora and fauna in my lifetime. Thank you.